Reporters for Vice News travel the world, putting a human face to the world's most important stories.
There's a solid wall of riot police officers.
But now, we introduce you to them.
They're doing CPR on one of the casualties here. We don't know if he's going to make it.
This is Field Notes, a show that sits down with our reporters to find out the stories behind their stories and how they got so close to the action.
Feeling pretty good about that?
In this episode, we hear from the team that traveled across the country in search of not just extraterrestrial life, but those who firmly believe it exists.
Here's a UFO.
And they find out what happens when conspiracy theories have a grain of truth to them.
Go! I'm going to share what I know truthfully, even if it's highly controversial.
Are you open to that perhaps you're wrong about this?
I have met someone from another planet. I know I'm not wrong. Our space brothers really want to help us.
This meditation is dedicated to everyone who are brave enough to become ambassadors to the universe together.
Vegas, thank you for joining me here in the office. People are back in the office. It's the first time
People are back in the office.
we're
It's
doing
amazing.
a Fields Notes, so forgive any interruptions. But let's talk about aliens, because this
Let's
is
talk
a
about aliens.
fun, interesting, bizarre, insightful piece. And I guess I want to know why. Like, why did you say, hey, let's go hang out with some people who believe that aliens exist?
So this story is the brainchild of the wonderful producer, Milena Mikhail-Dabas, who's unfortunately sick today. She can't be here. But this was her idea. And what she wanted to do was a story that didn't litigate the existence of aliens. That's not why we're doing this story. That's not what's important to us. Tell me about this experience that we're about to have.
Well, tonight I expect that we'll see a lot of ships. I will tell you that every single night is different, so you really don't know exactly what to expect.
But we wanted to look into the kind of person who believes in alien conspiracies. What kind of person is susceptible? And another question we're interested in is that scientists, there's general consensus that there's probably life in the universe. The universe is a big old place, right? So there's probably something out there. But these people who we met for this piece have gone further. So we wanted to find that point when this sort of mainstream scientific view becomes a conspiracy theory. What happens and who are the people who are out there on the fringes? So that's who we went to Arizona to talk to.
And what was it like to talk to these people? One thing I said, I remember when I was introducing this piece, when it was on Vice News Tonight, was Vegas, thanks for your patient reporting, because part of it seems like listening to people who are saying things that you might think, hey, that doesn't sound factually correct, and yet you're kind of trying to elicit from them another kind of truth, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, these people are, they're all kinds of different people, but what we found in general is that they are willing to believe a lot, and they are willing to take a lot at face value.
I do research. In other words, I don't believe things.
But also actual researchers do research.
Right.
So why don't we believe their research? Why is your research better than...
Because I'm doing it on my own.
And I'm just wondering, you know the term, if all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail?
Yeah, I have.
Could it be that you have a conspiracy hammer, and so everything around you kind of looks like a conspiracy?
Because I have seen through the years how the government reacts to things, I feel that I have a different vantage point.
So they'll believe in aliens, but they'll also believe in other things sort of QAnon adjacent stuff. They'll believe in anti-vax stuff. So I guess the takeaway we got was that once you fall into one rabbit hole, you can quite easily fall into others. So yeah, our conversation tended to always start out with aliens and end up somewhere completely different. And another interesting thing was they were very willing to believe, stuff that they had read on the internet. They had done their own research, but almost everything else that came from any kind of credible source, whether it was a scientific community or the government, they would just to a fault not believe that. So they would believe everything except sort of mainstream vetted information, which was very weird.
Yeah.
It was just there was such a stubbornness to it,
I mean, I think that's very similar to the the reporting I did about anti-vaxxers and stuff, like there's a kernel of truth to some of the things that they're saying. However, the extrapolations are wrong, and they will shut down when presented with consensus scientific belief.
But I mean, it's kind of interesting as well because the government, as we now know, has had a lot of weird information about unidentified flying phenomena, right? They've released reports saying that we've been aware of this stuff. We don't really know what it is. So the government has a track record of obfuscating, of not telling the whole story. So you kind of have to forgive them for not taking what the government says at face value. But then the flip side of that, why do you take just something some Yahoo wrote on Facebook at face value? It's like, it doesn't really add up. Like, it sounds like you should be incredulous to all the information, and yet they're just like, they disbelieve science and government and whatever, and everything else is just truth because they read it on a blog.
Well, and it's truth as you saw, like as you were observing a night sky, like that. Someone you were talking to, like, there's a UFO.
There's a UFO, and that was like a wild thing too, because they were just so cavalier with it, right? We were sitting out in the desert in Sedona. Have you ever been to Sedona?
No, I don't think so.
It's incredible. Like, it's one of the most beautiful places on Earth. And if the UFOs are going to show up anywhere, it's going to be in Sedona. It is very dramatic. It feels like spiritual and supernatural. Anyway, so we're sitting there at night with this woman, Sheila Nees, who was going to be our tour guide. And she's like, yeah, we're going to see some aliens today. And she fitted us with these military spec night vision goggles. So we're sitting in our camping chairs, and I put these on, and I look up, and the sky is just explodes in movement. Like, so, sometimes you sit under the stars at camping or something, and you can see a satellite. Like, you can see like one. There were hundreds. Like, it looked amazing. And she was just like, yeah, it's a busy night in the alien intersection. Because to her, they were all UFOs. And I'm not a scientist, and they could very well be. They were certainly unidentified by me, but they were more likely satellites. And she was like, no, satellites don't emit light, because you can see them. Satellites don't have lights on them. And they didn't, but they still reflect light. So that, anyway, I don't want to litigate whether or not she was right or wrong, but she just
had this. But that's sort of the trap, isn't it? When you start talking to people, you end up litigating what is right or wrong.
You've talked to anti-vaxxers, right? Their brains are so full of facts, but they're so well armed with this stuff. So unless you're equally well armed, like unless you are an expert on, vaccinations, then it becomes very hard because they're so well versed in litigating their, I don't want to call it nonsense, but we'll call a spade a spade. Yeah. So it becomes very hard to go up against them because they're so trained in this. So she was just like, there wasn't a shadow of a doubt in her mind. And then, the snowball kept rolling. Like, we have aliens on this planet, but humans have also established base on other planets, and the government knows about it, and she met an alien, and aliens are behind. It's a lot. It is a whole lot. They just throw at you.
What was it like for you as a reporter? Like, what made you say, this is interesting, and what made you say, I'm not sure if this is going to make the cut?
It's hard to... I'm glad I'm not an editor, and I'm glad I'm not a producer, and I'm sure you've felt the same way, because people throw a lot at you, and you have to figure out like what is usable and what isn't usable, and what story are we trying to tell. And it's easy with a story like that to sort of, are we trying to litigate the existence of aliens? And then you have to say, no, that's not what we're here. I don't care if Sheila believes that these are aliens. I don't really care if they're not. That's not what we're here for. We're trying to figure out like why Sheila believes the stuff she believes in. And so that was like, you want to try to keep focus on that thing. While they pummel you with weird stuff, you just have to try to eke out something that makes sense, or a narrative out of that. So it's hard, as you know.
So then why? Like, why do you think Sheila believed what she believed, and how do you think understanding that might help understand other broader conspiracy phenomena like QAnon, like white supremacist stuff, like all the other like extremism things that you've been covering. And
so you and I have had this conversation before when we've talked about similar issues like QAnon, and obviously there's a lot of psychology happening with these people. I don't even want to call them these people, but people who have a conspiratorial mindset. And I don't want to say that they all had trauma or they all had this and that, but I think we need to feel that our lives are significant, and we need to feel that we are part of something greater, because the alternative is very frightening, right? You know, the alternative to believing that there is a God or that there's aliens is that we're alone in a cold, uncaring universe. We are hurtling through space capriciously, and one day we'll be dead, and this is all, which is a scary thought, right?
Yeah.
So I think these people, they want the world to make sense in a way that makes sense to them. And so I think there's a comfort. There's a comfort in that. And I think it's the same with QAnon. I think it's the same with religion. And I think it's the same with you or I, right? I mean, look, you have a ring that says Vice on it because it's part of your identity. You have other identities, but it gives you significance. Like this gives us significance. We're all looking for this kind of thing, and it's just another way to have significance in your life, I think.
It's a story we tell to feel meaning.
Absolutely.
And I think part of what's behind all of the reporting in that extremism space and in the QAnon space, et cetera, is where do we find meaning when it's hard to find meaning?
Yeah. And I think this UFO space in particular, I think part of it is the government's fault. Like the government hasn't always told us the truth about, a great many things. And conspiracy theories are you have MK Ultra, which, happened. They have done mind-controlled experiments. They've given LSD to unknowing soldiers. They've done a lot of stuff. And there's also weird stuff to be seen out there. I looked up at the heavens and I saw a very, very busy sky. So when you have these questions about things you see and things you experience, and the government says, no, you didn't see anything, that's all nonsense. And then you kind of know that they've also been shady about stuff, then it becomes very easy to assume that everything the government and, whether it's the mainstream media or mainstream science is telling you is a lie. Like, this is all about trust, right? Like, we're only as good as the trust people have in us. Certainly that's true for us in the media. So when people have been cavalier with that tends to push people further into conspiratorial thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or am I ranting?
No, I think the rant here comes to a very significant point, which is trust. And I think back to like the X-Files, like trust no one as kind of the initiating element of that investigation, so to speak, in that fictional TV show. But if there aren't authorities to be trusted, then what do you do with the information that you're receiving, right? Because Sheila's seeing things in the sky.
You start trusting alternative sources because they tell a more compelling story. Like after we've seen Sheila, we went and visited this guy, Dr. Greer, who's a MD, but he's become this very famous known figure in something called the disclosure movement, which is a movement that says that the government knows about this stuff. The government is using alien technology. They've known about it for years, and we want them to disclose it. We want them to tell us about it. So they were having this big conference in Arizona, and we sat in on a few of the sessions that he had. And the thing is, he's made some like outlandish claims with zero evidence. He said stuff like, the government insiders tell us this. There is a shadow government that I know. They tell me stuff. It's like, where are they? It's like, well, they don't want to talk to you because they're shadow. It's like, well, okay, then what am I supposed to do with this information?
One time we were out at Joshua Tree, and one of these bizarre creatures that you could have thought it was an alien, but it was 3D. And it was set loose on one of our team members' houses, and it was at the windows and on the roof. And we had someone in the house. They had a gun. They came running out, and the thing scurried off into the desert. And they described that. I said, oh, yeah, I know how they're making those, like at Montauk out on Long Island ages ago. Too weird. It's the truth. What I'm telling you is the truth.
But people were so willing to believe it. Like the slides, the evidence he showed was basically like child drawings of aliens that he claimed someone had seen. And yet people were like, yes, we will accept this. So to me, it's interesting to be like, these people claim to be researchers or scientists or whatever, yet they are so credulous to this kind of evidence and completely incredulous when it comes to more established. It's really interesting, and it's deeply frustrating. You kind of want to shake these people as well, right?
And it's almost like, and in reporting it, there's a trap you can fall into where you're trying to convince them like that you're wrong, right? And instead of listening to try to understand what's happening. How did you find your way to avoiding that trap?
I mean, I've talked to some strange people in my day, right? Like my background is extremism reporting and particularly white supremacists and stuff like that. And you can easily get locked into, no, the Holocaust did happen. And then they'll say, no, it didn't because of this. And you learn pretty quickly that you're not going to change any hearts and minds. Like, it's very futile. And it's bad reporting as well, right? Like, you're not here to like fight these people. You're here to be a conduit for the viewers, for the listeners, for the readers. So your job is just to get them talking and ask questions that you think might be relevant, not to disprove them, but to just learn more about the way in which they see the world.
Back to the point about people ignoring the evidence that is like scientifically credible in favor of evidence that supports their underlying assumption. It's this like confirmation bias thing that I think pervades all of news consumers and people who like watch stuff on TV and are interested in factual television, right? You want to watch things that like confirm what you already believe.
Yeah, I mean, we're all like this, and of course, social media and algorithms haven't helped because we spend more and more time in echo chambers. And it's not just, I think, that they want information that sort of matches, or we want information that matches our worldview, but in the more conspiratorial parts of the world, you want just the fact that there is fake information or disinformation spread by the government or the globalist elites or George Soros becomes part of the narrative. So like it's not just that you want to read things that you agree with, it's also that you're part of this information warfare and that you're almost like a soldier in it. So I think like it serves two purposes. It confirms what you already know, and it confirms this worldview of like competing interests and bad guys and good guys and that kind of stuff.
Like, there's one thing that I noticed when I was watching this piece is it's fun, right? And what we've been talking about sort of behind this fun, when it manifests itself in white supremacy and anti-vax, in QAnon and anti-Semitic thought, there are harms and real damage and people who get hurt maybe from violence as a result of it. Aliens, it doesn't seem like that might be the case. It's effectively harmless in a way. I wonder, A, if that's true, and B, like, how did you have fun with it? Because it's similar in the way that you do other things, but it has, maybe the stakes aren't life or death, but they're more, I guess, intellectual, but really kind of spiritual.
So there's a few answers to that. You want to be careful with sort of inoffensive conspiracy theories because they can be a slippery slope. Like, they can be a gateway drug. And Sheila did talk to us about, pedophiles in power, child smuggling. Like, it seems like these days all roads lead to QAnon, which is, we know, can be dangerous. Which isn't to say that everyone who believes in a flat earth or that birds aren't real or that Finland doesn't exist, which are all incidentally real conspiracy theories, which isn't to say that these are all people who are going to turn into, January 6th insurrectionists. But, you got to keep an eye out, and you want to keep an eye out on the information media ecosystems that create this. But it is fun. And these people are colorful and harmless, and I don't want to do a piece that mocks them. I want to do a piece that's a little bit caring because they're nice people and they have a cool story to tell. And who am I to say that everything they believe is wrong and everything I believe is right? Like, you don't want to come in and like finger wag at people because then you're just a dick, right? Then you're just like, I live in Brooklyn and here's what's going on. And you don't want to be that guy. So if it's a fun story, then why not have a little bit of fun with it?
And if you would stand for the puja, I'd very much appreciate it.
And you're right, it is a spiritual pursuit. And like, we ended this piece with this great big meditation in the desert, which was really nice. And if at the end of the day, it gives them a sense of community and they're nice to each other. And these people were all nice to each other. They were really nice to us. They invited us in, even though they knew there was a good chance we were going to make them look ridiculous. And I don't
They
think we
must know
tried to
that
do
to
it.
some
Yeah,
degree,
they of course they know that, but they still allowed us in. They still talked to us. They were still upfront. And so they had this beautiful spiritual experience in the desert, which was really nice. I sat next to two people I'd never met before, and I held their hands for what felt like 5 hours, and it was great. And so if UFOs is just another word for God or whatever, then, no harm, no foul, I guess. We just gotta be a little bit careful about what happens further down that conspiracy road, because it can get dicey.
Well, Vegas, thank you for reporting on this.
I'm Michael Learmonth, editor-in-chief of Vice News. Too often, traditional news outlets shy away from the real stories and experiences of those living through global conflicts. Not Vice News. Our reporters are on the ground, fearlessly covering the human stories that shape our world. You and millions of others can continue to read, watch, and listen to Vice News for free. But we hope you'll consider making a one-time or ongoing contribution of any size at vice.com/contribute. Every contribution, no matter how big or small, helps support the journalism Vice News brings to you every day. Thank you.